Hello everyone, before we start the video, just a really quick disclaimer. This is an older video that I recorded all the way back in April. So as you can imagine, it won't be acknowledging any of the leaks that have supposedly been coming out. Honestly, I haven't been keeping up with them either, so I have no clue if anything in this video is relevant at all, but you know. I know I say it like twice in this video, but just one more reminder couldn't hurt. This is purely for fun. I'm not expecting any of these features to make it into the game or anything like that. That being said, I won't waste any more time. We can now transition to the video. Hello everyone, Rainan here. 2021 saw the release of Resident Evil Village, the 8th entry in the Resident Evil series. And after Village's release, we've been given an idea of when we can expect Resident Evil 9. Spoiler alert, it isn't going to be out for a while, and it's seemingly going to have the longest development cycle out of any of the Resident Evil games we've gotten so far. I would not be surprised if Resident Evil 9 has already been in pre-production for a while. However, that's not going to stop me from making a wish list. I felt just for grins and giggles, I should make a wish list for what I want to see most in Resident Evil 9. To be honest with you, I'm not expecting any of this to happen, but if it does, you can bet I'll be happy with it. And just to keep things fun, I made sure that some of these wishes were very spicy. My list is probably going to have a couple things that you might end up disagreeing with. And that's fine, it's all in the name of good fun. So keep in mind, I'm totally aware that some of these wishes are very insane. That being said, let's start with maybe the least controversial one. Number 9. I want to see good PC settings. That's it. Okay, to elaborate a little more, I wasn't very happy that Village removed the field of vision slider for God knows what reason. I already wasn't very happy that 7s only went up to 90 degrees. Capcom's justification for this is that it makes the game scarier, but I feel like in a lot of cases it ends up working against the scariness because you'll hear a noise in Village and you don't know where it's coming from. You'd think that'd help, but the reality is it ends up frustrating people because they don't know what to look at. It also makes the games feel very claustrophobic. It's just such an odd choice to remove it entirely given that even the third-person games, like the remakes, had FOV sliders still. So I think most people can agree with me, we want a decent set of settings. Not just for PC, I'm pretty sure some of us console gamers would really appreciate that as well. Number 8. I want to see a legacy character return. Really, the only legacy character that Ethan has interacted with is Chris Redfield. There is some Resident Evil Village concept art that implies that he was also supposed to interact with Ada Wong at one point. There's a handful of good choices we could pick from. There's the option of literally any of the STARS members, except for Chris, of course. Some other good options would be Leon, or Claire, or Ada. Obviously, given Ethan's current state, he can't really interact with any of these characters, of course, but I would like to see one of these characters become involved in the winner's situation post-Village. Personally, the character I want to see them dust off the most is actually Jill. Ever since the events of Resident Evil 5, Jill has been extremely quiet. There was actually an article I stumbled upon that just happened to have the same idea. Last we heard of Jill, she was undergoing psychological treatment after the events of Resident Evil 5. So odds are she's definitely not working for STARS and she's probably not working for the BSAA. But maybe somehow she just happens to get roped into a battle with the Connections. Maybe because of her torment under Wesker, she can empathize with people like Evelyn. The article I mentioned earlier also happened to pitch the idea of Jill maybe representing a character with PTSD. Maybe in RE9, alongside fighting the Connections, she might also be fighting her own trauma that she's experienced from earlier in her life. Maybe the treatment that she's undergone has only just barely given her the tools to do so. As someone with PTSD myself, I would really appreciate having a Resident Evil character that I could really relate to, instead of the weird Hollywoodified PTSD that Chris had in Resident Evil 5. Before I talk my head off on all the possibilities they could use, I want to wrap this up and say I would really like to see a legacy character in Resident Evil 9. Number 7. I really want to see the series stay survival horror. Now, I'm pretty sure Capcom has likely learned their lesson from Resident Evil 6, but seeing Village I can't help but be a tiny bit worried that they might be repeating a past mistake. And I know I'm not the only one who feels this way. I remember watching Arlo's review on Resident Evil Village, and he said basically the same thing. He doesn't want to see it progress from RE4 to RE5 to RE6. That being said, even though Village was a little more arcadey than 7, they still kept in a lot of the survival mechanics. Capcom still gave us the option to block and weave around encounters just like Resident Evil 7, instead of forcing us to kill everything in sight and collect a whole bunch of treasure like RE5 and 6 eventually did. I do miss the ability to duck under attacks though. I really hope they bring that back. Isn't it funny that number 7 is about survival horror? And you know, Resident Evil 7 was the one that brought survival horror back. This was actually coincidence. I didn't plan this out. That's actually kind of cool. Number 6. This ties a lot into my last 2 wishes. I kinda hope we don't play as Chris Redfield. They're building up to it, and odds are that we will, but I kinda hope that we don't. Because if that happens, it basically means the last 2 wishes won't happen. The Chris Redfield DLC in Resident Evil 7 and also the little Chris Redfield segment in Village were noticeably more arcadey than the usual parts of those games. Maybe it's just an irrational fear, but I have a tiny bit of a fear that a full game focused around him might end up being very arcadey, and as a result, not very survival horror. It's also just a preference thing as well. I would prefer to play as someone who is very vulnerable to the bioweapons around them, as opposed to someone who's military trained to deal with them. However, I would actually be very surprised if we don't play as Chris in the next game. It seems like they really want that, given the build-up in Village. Number 5. If the game does happen to star Chris, like it likely will, then you know what? Screw it. It might as well be a co-op game as well. So here's an insane idea. You have the Hound Wolf Squad, right? Village's concept art shows that Capcom put a great deal of time designing each of the members of the Hound Wolf Squad, and then seemingly something related to them got scrapped and now they're just kind of there. Maybe Resident Evil 9 can be their opportunity to implement those ideas. So let's say you get to pick a member of the Hound Wolf Squad and each one has their own special abilities and stats. And then here's where the idea gets crazier. They're heading for the BSAA headquarters in Europe, right? What if Resident Evil 9 had breaking and entering mechanics much like SWAT 4 or Rainbow Six Siege? Except instead of fighting terrorists, you're fighting bioweapons that have infested the building. And if the bioweapons were extremely fast and powerful, forcing you to have to create strategies with your partner, it would make a good excuse for the game to not feel so arcadey. We could actually maybe get a co-op survival horror game, since these would be the most advanced bioweapons that the BSAA has gotten a hold of, and therefore the Hound Wolf Squad would not have the sufficient enough training to deal with them. It would really bring back that feeling of vulnerability that I crave so much from Resident Evil games. Number 4. I really hope Mia gets an overhaul, just like Ethan did. Given that Resident Evil 9 is rumored to be part of a trilogy related to Ethan Winters, it can be assumed that Mia and potentially his daughter Rose will have something to do with the game. Given what happened to her husband and her difficult time raising Rose, Mia now has building blocks to advance her as a character and create a lot more depth in her. So far, it seems like Mia's sole existence is to just lie to Ethan and then somehow never learn her lesson. She seems to be a character that literally refuses to develop at all. So if she's presumably going to be related to the next game, I would really like to see her mature from this. Another idea is that we might actually play as Mia and maybe Chris plays a minor role in Resident Evil 9. That's totally another possibility, and in that case, an overhaul of Mia would be even more suitable for the game. We could also potentially play as Rose as well, depending on how the Resident Evil 8 DLC pans out. But most importantly, I just want to see them put some amount of effort into Mia, please. Number 3. I want to see a lot of loose ends in the lore tied up. Lately, Resident Evil has been creating a lot of factions and then just not doing a lot with them. I was very happy to see the BSAA return in Village. However, it just makes me curious about Blue Umbrella and the connections. I really do hope that all of these factions they keep starting for some reason meet their end. And I want a very satisfying conclusion, not any cliffhangers, not something that could be carried over into Resident Evil 10. I would very much prefer whatever game comes after 9 invent a new antagonist. If they start an entire new trilogy that just happens to be related to the mold, I might actually be a little upset. I think I might be even more upset if one of the very generic militaristic factions like the Hound Wolf Squad or the BSAA just happen to survive everything that happens in 9 and just gets grandfathered into the next games. You can probably tell I'm not very fond of Resident Evil's random military factions. I thought it was really cringe that there was a Neo Umbrella that pledges to fix all of the problems that Umbrella created, because I kind of knew in the back of my mind that it wasn't going to lead to anything remotely interesting. They pulled this stupid Neo faction crap in Street Fighter as well. For those who don't know, there's a Neo Shadaloo in Street Fighter V, and guess what? They don't do anything interesting. They don't even help anybody except for a couple emo teens. They just kind of exist. The gist is I would like to see Chris retire. He kind of deserves it. He's been in like almost every game. Also, this guy's like, how old now? Like, do they not give him a 401k or anything? I don't care how anime muscle man Capcom wants to make him. There's gotta be some point where he's gotta take up an office job or something. He can't just keep hopping from random faction to random faction. Especially if literally every single one he joins has the exact same narrative where, oh no, it's corrupted and I never knew until now. There's gotta be a point where his personality is more than just the surprise Pikachu face. I guess to shorthand it, I really hope that Capcom is writing some sort of satisfying conclusion for 9 and that they're not just planning to push everything into future games. I want all of this build up to be well worth the anticipation that they're creating. Number 2. So you might remember in Resident Evil Village, they had a slight origin story for Umbrella. No, not cringe Umbrella, I'm talking about Keck Umbrella this time. How cool would it be if for whatever reason, we had to return to the Spencer Mansion? We know that Mr. Spencer and Mother Miranda were both collaborating on the mold at some point, but Oswald Spencer decided he wanted to focus his attention on the progenitor instead. After all, they had vastly different scientific goals. So imagine having to come back to where it all started, completely remade and redesigned in the RE engine. This could also tie in really well with the Jill Valentine idea that I had earlier, as now she's forced to be in a place that's traumatized her in the past. Speaking of which, if the Jill thing actually does happen, I would hope this would be her final mission as well. And hey, maybe after this game, Capcom could throw in a Resident Evil 1 remake. Yeah, I know one already exists, I'm talking about an RE Engine remake. But I think having a legacy location in Resident Evil 9 would really tie everything together. Number 1. Earlier I had mentioned a rumor about Resident Evil 9 being part of a trilogy about Ethan Winters. This next wish kinda ties into my last one. I would like to explore a legacy location in first person. Now I know that the first person camera in the latest Resident Evil games has been very divisive. I'm not saying that Resident Evil 9 should be first person only. I feel like it would be really cool if there was an optional third person mode. And given that they're committed to adding that in Resident Evil 8, it might be something that they're willing to do for Resident Evil 9 as well. Maybe they could do a cool Metal Gear Solid 3 situation where if you view the cutscenes in first person, you see different details that you don't get in the third person cutscenes, and vice versa. Though to be honest, I feel like it would be a lot of work to create the game from the ground up to support 2 different view modes. I feel like the reality is the game will be either exclusively first person or exclusively third person. Most likely first person if they already started building the framework for the game right before Village launched. Personally, the first person Resident Evil games have been my favorite so far, but I also can't exactly blame people for being upset that these games don't offer a third person perspective, at least until Capcom realizes they can charge you money for it. Even though I didn't say a lot about this, I wouldn't be surprised if this would be my most divisive wish on this list. So I'm just gonna leave it there. Man, that was a mouthful. That was 9 wishes that I had for Resident Evil 9. Again, these are purely for fun. I don't really expect any of these to make it into Resident Evil 9. However, I thought it would be fun to have some crazy out there ideas that are kind of self-aware with how insane they are, instead of just being a man-child and begging Capcom to do what I want them to, and you know, just harassing them on Twitter for no reason. I hope that some of these have at least piqued your interest a little bit. Hopefully there were a few moments where you were like, hey, that sounds kinda cool actually. I would really appreciate it if you went down in the comments and you also shared your wish list as well. Bonus points if any of them are crazy enough to immediately make us want to have a discussion about it. I absolutely love hearing what people want out of Resident Evil games and discussing them, so I very much invite you to do so in the comments. That being said, I'll see you all next time.